As a priest, I have the privilege of helping couples as they prepare for the sacrament of marriage. And as part of this, I try to share some of the wisdom that the Church has learned from the countless marriages and families that we've had over our 2,000-year history. In our previous video, I spoke a bit about the theological and spiritual foundations of our capacity and desire for relationship. And in this video, I'd like to share a few things I pass on that are specific to married life. Firstly, it's worth noting that Jesus' most commonly used image for what the kingdom of heaven is like was a wedding banquet, whereas St. Paul would offer marriage as a sign of the covenant between Christ and the church. In other words, there's something about this joyful coming together of two into one that reflects both the life of heaven and the love that Christ has for his followers. This is perhaps why, even though marriage predated Christ, he raised it to an all-new dignity by making it a sacrament. In doing so, he also purified some aspects that were common to marriage at the time. So for instance, polygamy was certainly not unknown in the ancient world, but since this is not befitting of the dignity of the partners, it's not part of the Christian understanding of marriage. Altogether, we can speak of four main characteristics of Christian marriage. It's free, it's total, it's faithful, and it's fruitful. Firstly, like all expressions of genuine love, Christian marriage is freely given and received. The partners must freely consent of their own free will to enter into the union, and no human power or coercions can substitute for this consent. If this freedom is lacking, the marriage is invalid. So, if someone puts a gun to your head and drags you to the altar, it's not a valid marriage. The partners also have to be free to marry. In other words, they're not already married, not too closely related, and so forth. Secondly, Christian marriage involves a total giving of oneself, mirroring the complete self-donation amongst the divine persons of the Trinity that I spoke of in the last video. Not only should the partners strive to not hold anything back from each other, physically, spiritually, emotionally, they are also called to love the entirety of the other, including their weaknesses. Christian marriage is also faithful. The promises made at the wedding are not conditional, but hold true in sickness and in health, in wealth or in poverty, in good times and in bad, when feelings of love are felt and when they are not felt. As I've mentioned previously, genuine love is not about feelings, but about willing the good of the other. And this commitment to love, day after day, even once the excitement dies down, guides the partner's actions until death. But this fidelity is not just about actions, but is also about words and thoughts. And so speaking poorly about one's spouse behind their back, or fantasizing about being with someone else, would be examples of a lapse of faithfulness. Finally, Christian marriage is fruitful. Married love is life-giving because it is free, total, and faithful. It is open to the possibility of new life, if it be God's will, and is life-giving in the spiritual and emotional realms as well. And this fruitfulness is not just about their immediate family either, but it overflows beyond the couple. The love a married couple shares cannot be hoarded as though their relationship were the be-all and end-all of everything. On the contrary, their mutual love goes on to become a gift for their children, a gift for the communities in which they live and work, and in a mysterious way, a gift for the entire world. Here's the thing. The uglier our culture gets, and the more it distances itself from its Judeo-Christian inheritance, the more attractive that simple goodness and indeed holiness becomes. People are drawn to it, even people of no faith. As G.K. Chesterton once put it, there is nothing more extraordinary than an ordinary man and his ordinary wife and their ordinary children. I'm not talking about some kind of false ideal that no one can live up to. I'm just talking about good people doing their best to be faithful to their calling and refusing to give in to a cynical society that says good family life is impossible. Christian families have a great power of witness just by being what they are. Despite the shortcomings they no doubt have, the disagreements that likely take place, and maybe some periodic failures in charity, simply not giving up is itself a powerful witness, which speaks volumes, and which even very cynical people find themselves attracted to in spite of themselves. Well, before I end this video, let me share some practical advice that I generally offer to couples as they're preparing for their wedding. Firstly, I think it's tremendously important to emphasize the difference between before and after the wedding. These days, a lot of people in our society already live together prior to marriage, and in such situations, it can seem like there's not a whole lot of practical difference between before and after a wedding. Well, one problem with this is that the more that people slide into a marriage, as it were, the easier it is for them to slide out of it. And this is true simply on a psychological level. If the start of a marriage doesn't seem like a big step, then ending one doesn't seem as big of a step either. And there's overwhelming social data on how couples that live together before marriage have a much higher divorce rate than those who don't. So if I have a couple preparing for marriage who already live together, I always encourage them to take whatever steps they can to emphasize the difference between before and after the wedding. One of them moving out, if possible, or at least sleeping in different rooms prior to the wedding. Not only does this offer measurable ballast to the marriage, it also makes their honeymoon that much better. The second piece of advice I give is the importance of prayer, both individually and together. And this can perhaps seem a little weird at first for couples who aren't used to it, but it really is something worth getting used to. You've perhaps heard the slogan, "The family that prays together stays together." And I know this sounds rather cliche and people often make fun of it, but as a priest I can tell you that there are some very sobering realities that point to the truth of this slogan. And it's not just about saying prayers together, although that's certainly a good start, but it's ultimately about making a sincere effort to put God first in the couple's life together. It's just so easy for us to slip into self-centered patterns without a regular reminder of our continual need for God. And as I noted in the last video, I believe that many relationship issues come from looking for partners to have the kind of place in our lives that only God can fill. A serious commitment to prayer helps guard against this temptation and nourishes the couple's relationship in often surprising ways. A third piece of advice is to regularly say sorry, both to your spouse and to God in the sacrament of reconciliation. You sometimes hear the saying, "Love means never having to say you're sorry." Well, I'm sorry, but I think that's terrible advice. There are just so many benefits of regular self-examination, regular admission of faults, and regular renewal of the love commitment, both with one's partner and with God. Amongst the couple, it helps reduce the temperature and builds trust during times of tension. And vis-a-vis God, regular reconciliation provides an influx of sacramental grace that renews and strengthens the marriage covenant. My final piece of advice is to nurture a love for the Eucharist. In the Eucharist, we are given a foretaste of the perfect union that we have been made for in heaven, and it nourishes our efforts at union in this life. Receiving the Eucharist is such an intimate, almost carnal act. Think of how a person who is madly in love wants to be as close to their beloved as possible, to be inside them, to consume them and be consumed by them. Well, in the Eucharist, Christ gives us his very self for us to consume. As we learned as little children, you are what you eat. Well, regular food, when we eat it, it becomes part of our body. But the food that Christ gives us, when we eat it, we become part of his body. It's an amazing mystery, and it's the closest we will get in this life to perfect union with God. At the end of the day, a Christian couple's highest calling is to help each other and any children they may be blessed with to get to heaven. This is the great adventure they commit to on their wedding day, and if lived with fidelity, the graces of this adventure flow out as a source of tremendous life and grace for both the church and the world. Well, thanks so much for watching. If you haven't already, feel free to subscribe to our CYM page to get notified each time we put out a video. And next month, we'll be doing a special Ask Me Anything video. So feel free to send us a question if there's anything you'd like me to discuss in our next video. And until then, be a saint.